There is a strange kind of slavery that leaves no chains upon the hands. A man may walk freely through the world, choose his own clothes, speak his own words, and yet remain governed by the judgment of people he scarcely knows. He may change his convictions because someone laughed, abandon a worthy ambition because someone doubted him, or remain silent because he fears appearing foolish. And the tragedy is not that other people have opinions. The tragedy is that he has quietly handed them authority over his own mind. Most people do not realize how much of their life is spent trying to manage the thoughts of others. They want to be respected, admired, accepted, understood. None of these desires is evil in itself. But the moment your peace depends upon receiving approval, your peace no longer belongs to you. You have placed the key to your happiness in the hands of strangers, friends, relatives, colleagues, and sometimes even people who have never taken the time to understand you. A disciplined mind begins to see this differently. It learns that another person's opinion is not automatically a verdict. Someone may misunderstand you without making you wrong. Someone may dislike your direction without knowing your destination. Someone may criticize your growth because it reminds them of what they have neglected in themselves. And sometimes people will simply judge you, because human beings are creatures who form opinions before they possess the wisdom to form them well. The question, then, is not whether people will talk. They will. The deeper question is whether you will allow their voices to become the voice inside your own head. Whether you will surrender your judgment every time someone disapproves. Whether you will spend your limited years attempting to become acceptable to everyone, only to discover that the person you have neglected most completely is yourself. When you begin mastering your mind, something powerful happens. You stop treating every opinion as an emergency. You listen without becoming enslaved. You accept correction without accepting humiliation. You can examine criticism without allowing it to destroy your confidence. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the opinions that once controlled your emotions begin to lose their throne. There comes a point in a man's life when he must decide whether he will live by conviction or by permission. The world is full of voices, and many of them speak with such confidence that we mistake confidence for truth. One person tells you that your ambition is foolish. Another tells you that you are changing too much. Someone else laughs at the seriousness with which you take your work. And because these voices come from outside you, they can seem more authoritative than the quiet judgment within you. Yet a man's conscience does not become wiser merely because a crowd disagrees with it. The desire for approval begins innocently enough. A child learns to look toward the faces around him before deciding whether something is good or bad. Praise teaches him what pleases others, and disappointment teaches him what displeases them. As he grows older, this instinct often remains, though it becomes more sophisticated. He may no longer ask, "Will they praise me?" He asks whether they will respect him, whether they will understand him, whether they will think him successful, whether they will approve of the choices he has made. The language changes, but the dependence remains. There is nothing wrong with listening to wise people. Indeed, a person who refuses all counsel is not strong but proud. The danger begins when listening becomes surrender. You may hear another person's judgment without making it your master. You may consider criticism without allowing it to define you. You may even discover that someone who opposed you was right about one thing and wrong about another. A mature mind is capable of making such distinctions because it is not desperately trying to defend an image of itself. The man who depends upon approval becomes strangely easy to control. Tell him he is foolish and he retreats. Praise him and he follows. Mock his ambition and he begins to doubt it. Applaud his choices and he assumes they must be good. His direction changes according to the weather of other people's moods. He may call this humility, but it is often only fear wearing respectable clothing. To trust your own judgment does not mean believing yourself incapable of error. It means accepting the responsibility of thinking carefully and then standing behind what you have honestly concluded. There is courage in saying, "I may be wrong, but I will not pretend to believe what I do not believe simply because it would make me more acceptable." Such a person becomes difficult to manipulate because he does not require constant reassurance before taking the next step. And this is where the mind begins to become free. You stop asking everyone whether your life makes sense to them. You stop explaining every decision merely because someone questions it. You stop turning every disagreement into a personal crisis. You understand that another person's inability to see your purpose does not necessarily make your purpose foolish. There will always be people who prefer the version of you that required less courage. They may have become accustomed to your hesitation, your availability, your agreement, your willingness to remain where you were. When you begin to think independently, they may call it arrogance. When you establish boundaries, they may call you cold. When you stop chasing their approval, they may wonder what happened to the person who once needed their permission. But perhaps nothing has happened except that you have begun to take responsibility for your own mind. You are learning that respect is not something you obtain by making everyone pleased with you. It is something that grows from living honestly, thinking carefully, keeping your word, and refusing to betray your conscience merely to avoid disapproval. A person who has learned this does not become insensitive to others. He becomes less frightened by them. He can listen without trembling, disagree without hatred, and walk away without needing the final word. His confidence is no longer built upon applause, and therefore silence cannot easily destroy it. He does not need every room to welcome him before he enters it. He does not need every person to understand him before he continues forward. He has discovered that the deepest form of independence is not doing whatever you please, but becoming capable of choosing what is right even when no one applauds the choice. Criticism has a peculiar power over the human mind because it often arrives wearing the appearance of truth. A careless insult can be dismissed, but a criticism that touches some hidden insecurity can remain in the mind for days. A person may forget 100 words of encouragement because of one sentence spoken against him. He begins replaying it, examining it, defending himself against it, and sometimes changing the course of his life, merely because someone expressed an opinion about him. But criticism is not always correction, and disagreement is not always wisdom. There is a great difference between being told something unpleasant and being shown something true. The mature mind learns to separate the two. When someone criticizes you, the first temptation is usually emotional. You want to answer immediately. You want to prove your innocence, defend your character, or demonstrate that the other person is mistaken. Yet the need to respond at once is often evidence that the criticism has already gained control of you. A person who possesses his mind does not feel compelled to answer every accusation simply because it has been spoken aloud. He can allow words to remain words until he has examined whether they deserve a response. This does not mean becoming deaf to correction. There are few things more dangerous than a person who cannot be corrected. Pride can disguise itself as strength by refusing every uncomfortable truth. If someone points out a genuine weakness, the wise response is not to destroy the messenger simply because the message hurts. Sometimes criticism is the unpleasant instrument by which reality introduces itself. But even when criticism is deserved, it does not have the right to become your identity. You may have made a foolish decision without being a foolish person. You may have failed without being a failure. You may have acted badly without being condemned to remain the person who acted badly. A healthy mind can admit wrongdoing without turning that admission into self-hatred. There will also be criticism that has very little to do with your character and much more to do with another person's expectations. Some people become uncomfortable when you change because your change forces them to reconsider their own choices. They may have preferred the quieter version of you, the more agreeable version, the version that never challenged anything. When you begin becoming disciplined, focused, or independent, your behavior may disturb people who are comfortable with your old habits. You must learn not to confuse their discomfort with your wrongdoing. If every criticism determines your direction, you will eventually become a person assembled from other people's expectations. You will speak differently around one group, behave differently around another, and abandon your convictions whenever approval becomes uncertain. Such a life may look peaceful from the outside, but inwardly it is exhausting because you are constantly performing different versions of yourself. The stronger way is to examine criticism calmly. Ask yourself whether there is truth in it. If there is, learn from it. If there is not, release it. You do not need to hate the person who criticized you, nor do you need to convince them that they were wrong. Sometimes the wisest answer to an opinion is simply to continue living carefully. Your emotions may still rise. You may still feel hurt when someone misunderstands you. Mastery does not mean becoming made of stone. It means refusing to let every emotional reaction become a command. You can feel anger without speaking from anger. You can feel embarrassment without abandoning your purpose. You can feel disappointed without changing your principles. This is a quiet form of strength because it does not announce itself. No one may notice the moment when you decide not to retaliate. No one may know that you received an insult and chose reflection instead of revenge. No one may see you hear criticism, consider it honestly, and then continue walking because you have decided that your direction cannot be determined by every passing voice. A person who reaches this point becomes difficult to shake, not because nobody can criticize him, but because criticism no longer possesses the authority to tell him who he is or where he must go. One of the great difficulties of becoming mature is learning that not every voice deserves the same weight. The world speaks constantly, And because a statement is spoken with confidence, we are often tempted to believe that it must contain wisdom. But confidence is not wisdom, volume is not truth, and popularity is not proof. 100 people may hold the same opinion and still be mistaken, while one quiet person may see what the crowd has overlooked. This is why mastering your mind requires more than simply becoming independent. It requires becoming discerning. If you reject every opinion, because you want to prove that you think for yourself, you have not escaped the influence of others. You have merely allowed them to control you in the opposite direction. True independence is not refusing to listen. It is becoming capable of listening without surrendering your judgment. There are people whose advice should be taken seriously, because their lives have taught them something. They have endured consequences, corrected their mistakes, practiced patience, and learned to see beyond their immediate feelings. Their words may not always be pleasant, but they carry the weight of experience. Wisdom often comes quietly because it has no need to impress the room. Then there are opinions that arise from insecurity, envy, fear, habit, or ignorance. Such opinions may be delivered with great certainty. Someone may tell you that your dream is unrealistic because they have never attempted anything difficult. Someone may discourage your discipline because your improvement reminds them of their own lack of discipline. Another may ridicule your seriousness because they have built their life around avoiding anything that demands sacrifice. If you cannot distinguish these voices, you will spend your life being pulled in different directions. The wise person therefore asks questions before accepting judgment. Does this person understand what he is talking about? Has he experienced what he is advising me about? Does his criticism come from concern or from contempt? Is there evidence behind his opinion or merely emotion? Most importantly, does the advice lead me toward truth and responsibility, or merely toward comfort and approval? These questions protect the mind from becoming a marketplace where every passing opinion is treated as valuable. You must also learn to recognize the difference between someone disagreeing with your choice and someone revealing a genuine danger in it. Not every obstacle is persecution. Sometimes people oppose you because they see a weakness that you have refused to see. Sometimes the criticism you dislike most is precisely the criticism you need. Humility requires the courage to examine even the words that wound your pride. But humility does not mean believing every accusation against you. There is an opposite error in which a person becomes so eager to appear humble that he accepts every negative opinion as truth. He allows someone else's misunderstanding to become his self-image. He begins saying, "Perhaps I really am incapable. Perhaps I really am foolish. Perhaps I should stop trying." This is not humility, it is surrender. A healthy mind can say, "There may be something here that I need to learn," without saying, "Therefore this person gets to define me." The distinction is small in words but enormous in consequence. When you learn it, conversations become less threatening. You can hear disagreement without immediately defending your existence. You can accept advice without becoming dependent upon the advisor. You can reject an opinion without despising the person who holds it. You become capable of carrying both praise and criticism without allowing either to become the foundation of your identity. This is especially important because praise can control a person just as easily as criticism. A man who lives for compliments may appear confident while he is actually dependent. Give him admiration and he moves forward. Withdraw it and he begins to doubt himself. His confidence is simply another form of obedience to other people's opinions. Wisdom frees you from both extremes. It teaches you to value truth above applause and reality above reputation. You begin to ask not, "What will people think of me?" but, "What is actually true? What is actually right? What kind of person am I becoming through this choice?" And once those questions become more important than the opinions surrounding you, something changes within you. The crowd may still speak, friends may still disagree, critics may still judge, but their voices no longer sit upon the throne of your mind because you have learned to examine every voice before deciding whether it deserves to be heard. There is a great deal of noise in the world, and much of it comes from the human desire to be understood. We explain ourselves, defend our choices, correct misunderstandings, and attempt to make certain that other people see us in the way we wish to be seen. Yet there comes a time when a person must discover that not every misunderstanding requires an explanation, and not every accusation deserves an answer. The need to prove yourself can become a hidden form of dependence. You may imagine that you are defending your dignity, when in reality you are asking another person to confirm your worth. You explain why you made the decision, why you walked away, why you remained silent, why you changed, why you refused to participate. And after all your explanations, the other person may still misunderstand you. You have spent your strength attempting to control something that was never yours to control. A mastered mind understands the limits of explanation. There is wisdom in knowing when words are useful and when silence is better. Silence does not always mean weakness. Sometimes it means that you have become strong enough to let your actions speak where arguments would only create more noise. A person who is secure in his convictions does not need to turn every disagreement into a courtroom where he must prove his innocence. This is difficult because the human ego dislikes being misunderstood. We want people to know our intentions. We want them to recognize our sacrifices and understand the reasons behind our choices. When they do not, something within us cries out for correction. We think, if only they knew the whole story, they would understand me. But people rarely possess the whole story of another person's life, and sometimes they are not interested in possessing it. You must therefore learn to live without universal understanding. There will be people who interpret your silence as weakness because they cannot imagine strength without noise. There will be people who interpret your boundaries as arrogance because they benefited from your lack of boundaries. There will be people who call your patience passivity and your independence selfishness. If you spend your life correcting every interpretation, you will have little time left to actually live. The stronger person learns that reputation is not entirely within his control. You can control your character, your decisions, your effort, and the honesty with which you conduct yourself. You cannot control every story someone tells about you. Trying to control it will exhaust you because human beings are free to misunderstand one another. Silence becomes powerful when it comes from certainty rather than fear. The silent person is not necessarily afraid to speak. He may simply recognize that speaking would accomplish nothing. He has discovered that some arguments become larger when fed with attention. Some insults disappear when they receive no emotional response. Some people lose interest when they realize they cannot provoke you into becoming someone you do not wish to be. This does not mean that you should remain silent when truth requires speech. There are moments when courage demands that you speak, defend another person, admit your mistake, or establish a necessary boundary. Silence can become cowardice when it is used to avoid responsibility. The difference lies in the reason behind it. Are you silent because you are afraid of what people will think, or because you have decided their opinion does not require your response? That question reveals much about the condition of your mind. When you stop needing to prove yourself, your energy returns to you. You no longer spend hours rehearsing conversations that have already ended. You stop imagining what you should have said. You stop constructing perfect explanations for imperfect people. You begin to understand that the best evidence of your character is not what you can say about yourself, but what you consistently do when nobody is watching. A life built on action requires fewer explanations. If you are truly becoming disciplined, time will reveal it. If you are becoming trustworthy, your conduct will reveal it. If you are becoming stronger, difficult circumstances will reveal it. You do not need to announce every transformation while it is happening. There is a particular dignity in allowing your life to remain partly unexplained. Not because mystery makes you superior, but because you have finally accepted that you do not need to be understood by everyone in order to remain faithful to what you know is right. And when that realization settles deeply within the mind, silence is no longer an empty space waiting to be filled with justification. It becomes the quiet strength of a person who has nothing to prove to those who have already decided what they want to believe. There is a strange temptation in human nature to make oneself smaller whenever another person becomes uncomfortable. We call it kindness, patience, or keeping the peace, and sometimes it is those things. But there are moments when what appears to be kindness is really fear. We begin changing our words, hiding our convictions, lowering our standards, abandoning our ambitions, and pretending not to care about things that matter deeply to us, simply because someone else prefers the easier version of who we used to be. The difficulty is that people often become accustomed to the version of you that serves their comfort. If you are always available, they may dislike your boundaries. If you always agree, they may resent your disagreement. If you constantly put yourself last, they may consider your first step towards self-respect selfishness. This does not necessarily mean that these people are cruel. Sometimes they have simply grown comfortable with an arrangement that benefited them, and your growth changes the arrangement. A person who has begun mastering his mind learns that discomfort is not always evidence of wrongdoing. Sometimes discomfort is simply the natural consequence of change. You cannot become more disciplined without disappointing the part of yourself that wants ease. You cannot become more honest without disturbing relationships built upon pretending. You cannot become more independent without causing some people to realize that they can no longer make your decisions for you. This is where many people turn back. They mistake resistance for a warning that they are going the wrong way. Someone criticizes them, so they retreat. Someone becomes distant, so they apologize for changing. Someone says, "You are not the same anymore," and they hear the statement as an accusation rather than a fact. But perhaps you are not supposed to be the same. Growth means that some habits must disappear. Some conversations will no longer interest you. Some environments will begin to feel too small. Some relationships may need new boundaries. This does not mean you have become better than everyone around you. It means that the person you are becoming requires different choices from the person you were. The danger is not in changing. The danger is in changing without conviction. If you constantly reshape yourself according to whoever happens to be disappointed with you, eventually you will possess no stable identity at all. You will become agreeable but uncertain, accepted but divided, surrounded by people who know the version of you that you created for their approval, but perhaps never meet the person you actually are. There is a difference between selfishness and self-respect. Selfishness says only my desires matter. Self-respect says my conscience matters too. Selfishness refuses responsibility for others. Self-respect refuses to destroy oneself merely to satisfy expectations. A mature person can care about people without becoming controlled by their reactions. You can listen when someone tells you that you have hurt them. You can apologize when you are wrong. You can adjust your behavior when correction is deserved. But you do not have to abandon every conviction simply because someone is disappointed by it. Love does not require you to become a prisoner of another person's expectations. There will be moments when choosing what is right makes you appear difficult. There will be moments when saying no makes you feel guilty. There will be moments when your silence is interpreted as arrogance and your boundaries as rejection. These moments test whether your values are real or merely words you use when they cost you nothing. A strong mind does not seek conflict, but neither does it worship comfort. It understands that peace purchased by betraying yourself is not genuine peace. It is only the absence of immediate disagreement, and beneath that quiet may be resentment, exhaustion, and the slow loss of respect for your own judgment. You must become willing to disappoint people without becoming cruel to them. That is a difficult balance. You do not need to punish anyone for failing to understand your choices. You do not need to announce your independence dramatically. You simply need to become honest about what you can give, what you cannot give, what you believe, and what kind of life you are responsible for building. The people who truly care about you may not always agree with your decisions, but they will eventually recognize that you are becoming more honest, rather than merely more difficult. And those who only valued you when you were easy to control may become distant when control is no longer available to them. That loss can hurt, but not every loss is a tragedy. Sometimes what leaves your life was attached to a version of you that no longer exists. Sometimes the relationship cannot survive because it was built upon your constant surrender. And sometimes the most uncomfortable thing you can do for everyone involved is to stop pretending that you are someone you are not. You begin to understand that your life cannot be a permanent negotiation between your conscience and everybody else's comfort. You can be considerate without being controlled, compassionate without being weak, and humble without constantly apologizing for becoming stronger. The moment you stop demanding that everyone approve of your growth, you become free to grow honestly, quietly, and without the exhausting burden of remaining familiar to people who were only comfortable with the person you used to be. Fear of judgment is one of the quietest forces that can govern a human life. It rarely announces itself as fear. It often appears as caution, politeness, hesitation, or the desire to fit in. A person may tell himself that he is simply being practical when he refuses an opportunity because others might laugh. He may call it humility when he hides his abilities because he does not want to appear proud. He may call it wisdom when he chooses the familiar path simply because the unfamiliar one might invite criticism. The truth is that many people do not fear failure nearly as much as they fear being seen failing. They would rather remain ordinary than risk becoming ridiculous. They would rather keep an untested dream than pursue it and discover that others were watching. They would rather live with the quiet disappointment of never trying than experience the temporary embarrassment of being judged. But a life governed by the fear of judgment slowly becomes a life that belongs to other people. Every choice begins to pass through the imagined courtroom of public opinion. What will they think? What if they laugh? What if they disagree? What if they notice that I am struggling? What if they see that I am not as confident as I appear? These questions can become so familiar that a person no longer realizes they are controlling him. He believes he is choosing freely, while much of his life is being arranged around avoiding the opinions of others. Mastering your mind begins when you recognize that judgment is unavoidable. People will form opinions whether you succeed or fail. If you remain quiet, someone may call you weak. If you speak confidently, someone may call you arrogant. If you work hard, someone may say you are obsessed. If you rest, someone may call you lazy. If you change, someone may say you have become distant. If you remain the same, someone may say you lack ambition. There is no arrangement of your life that will satisfy every observer. Once you understand this, the pursuit of universal approval begins to look as foolish as trying to hold back the wind with your hands. You cannot control every opinion, but you can control the authority you give those opinions. That is where freedom begins. A strong mind does not become careless about reputation. Character still matters. Your actions affect others, and you should care about being honest, responsible, and trustworthy. But there is a difference between caring about your character and being terrified of your image. Character asks, am I living rightly? Image asks, do people think I am living rightly? One directs you inward toward truth. The other keeps your attention trapped outside yourself. The person who has mastered his mind can walk into a room without needing to be admired by everyone in it. He can speak without rehearsing every possible reaction. He can make a reasonable mistake without believing that his entire identity has collapsed. He can begin something new while knowing that others may doubt him. He can continue quietly when applause disappears. This kind of freedom does not come from becoming fearless. It comes from learning that fear does not deserve the final vote. You may still feel embarrassed. You may still become nervous when people criticize you. You may still wonder whether others understand your choices. But those feelings no longer dictate your direction. You can carry them while continuing forward. Courage is not the absence of these feelings. It is the refusal to make them your master. There is also a strange irony in seeking approval. The more desperately you seek it, the less natural you become. You begin performing instead of living. You calculate your words, monitor your appearance, and measure your worth through reactions. You become a spectator of your own life, constantly checking the audience instead of paying attention to the road. But when you stop living for judgment, something simpler returns. You can work because the work matters. You can improve because improvement is worthwhile. You can apologize because humility matters. You can say no because your responsibilities matter. You can pursue a meaningful goal even when nobody applauds the beginning. And perhaps the greatest freedom is this: you no longer need to make your life look impressive in order for it to be meaningful. You can endure seasons when progress is invisible. You can be misunderstood while remaining faithful. You can walk through a period where nobody notices what you are building, because you have finally learned that the value of a thing is not determined by the number of people watching it. When the mind becomes its own master, judgment loses much of its power. Other people may still speak, criticize, praise, misunderstand, or doubt, but their voices become information rather than commands. You hear them, consider them, and then return to the deeper question that should govern a human life. Not whether everyone approves of you, but whether you are becoming the person you know you ought to be.